Hey yogis. Today we're going to be talking about the most important thing in Ashtanga Yoga. And what is the most important thing in Ashtanga Yoga? It's mastering the art of showing up. I'll be talking about why it's the most important thing in Ashtanga Yoga. I'll be talking about how to master the art of showing up. I'll be talking about, I'll give some sort of tips and tricks in order to help you master the art of showing up. I'll talk about how often people have practiced and how to figure out how often you should practice. And then I'll give a bit of a summary at the end. Okay, so mastering the art of showing up. When new students come to my yoga classes, they're often a bit surprised that they don't actually do that much asana. In their perspective, when they think that yoga is asana, they might think, I did almost no yoga. Well, if they've come, then they've paid for a month, so they're going to be here for a month, and the yoga's going to happen. What's more important to me is that they discover how to get to class. Now, I'd be happy if they just came and drank tea for the first week. That's not what happens. We sit down, we have a chat, we talk about their goals, all sorts of different things, what they want about yoga, what yoga is, so on and so forth. And they usually do some Surya Namaskar and some seated meditation, things like that. But what they're really learning is how to get to class. In order to have any benefit from yoga, you need to come to class. And Ashtanga Yoga specifically is a yoga sadhana. It's a yoga practice. And to get to class is what we need to do in order to practice. When these new students turn up to class, the first thing they're doing is they're building a habit. So they've got out of bed, they've had a shower, they've had their coffee, they got dressed, all their things, put their shoes on, they've got their bike, got onto their bike, ridden to class, come up the stairs here, come into the room. And that's something that they need to repeat each day or often enough, depending on how often they practice, in order to make it work. Because there are going to be times where that's a lot more difficult and they need to have built that up. And it's much more important for me that they build that up than they start doing complicated poses, that they get exhausted in class, that they start working on their physicality or their mental state in class. The other thing they get in class is they start to see other yogis. And the first day, we had a lot this morning. If a newbie would have come this morning, then they would have seen a whole bunch of yogis in class, practicing. And if they come the next day, they'll see the same yogis coming, practicing. And a lot of yogis will think, well, they're normal people. If they can do it, I can do it. And that's what I want them to think. Now, building the habit is the most important thing first off. But in order to find out, well, why should I put the effort in? Why should I build that habit? We have to reflect on why we're doing yoga. So why are you here in the first place? Why did you sign up? Why did you come to yoga? Because that ends up being the reason why you'll master the art of showing up. Do you do yoga for a physical reason? Are you doing it to improve your strength, your balance, your fitness, your flexibility? Because that's only going to happen when you're actually on the mat, when you're actually doing the work. And if you don't show up, well, obviously it's not going to happen. And so that is the base reason why someone who's doing yoga for physical reasons, fitness and so on, needs to master the art of showing up to class before they master any poses. Are you doing yoga for your mental state? Are you doing it for peace? Are you doing it for equanimity, to handle stress? Are you doing it for happiness? Well, it's the same thing. In order to do these practices, and many of you have done a number of different meditation practices with me that really, really work on this, well, it's the same thing. Unless you're doing these practices, you're not going to get these things. You're not going to get the benefit. And so in order to do these practices, we have to be on the mat, or we have to be in the room. We have to master that art of showing up. And then a lot of students, especially older students, come for spiritual reasons. They want spiritual development. They might want ego dissolution. They might want to experience samadhi states. They might want to discover non-dualism, Advaita. And these spiritual things are the same thing. So we need to be there. We need to do our sadhana. We need to do our practice in order to achieve these things. And a useful way of looking at it is that the time will pass anyway. That time can pass with you as a yogi or with you not as a yogi. It's up to you. It's your call. Do you want to have these days, months, weeks, years passing as a yogi, having a yoga practice? Or do you want to have these years pass you by without a yoga practice and without these developments? That really is it. And if you don't want to be a yogi, if you don't want to have a yoga practice, then fair enough, do something else. Get a different hobby. But if you do want to practice yoga, or if you do know the benefits, if you do experience the benefits that I was just talking about, be them physical, be they mental, be they spiritual, understand that those are only going to happen if you actually practice the yoga. And that's why mastering the art of turning up is the most important thing in Ashtanga Yoga. Okay, so the yoga scriptures speak a lot about this, and as Ashtangis, we follow the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and you don't have to look far in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali to find it. In fact, it's on the first page. It's only 14 lines in. Line 14 of the first chapter says, Sattu dirghakala nairantarya satkara adara asevito dritta bhumehi. What's this saying? Well, it's saying yoga will be established in one with a consistent practice performed with effort over an extended period of time, which is exactly what I've been saying, and it's exactly what I've experienced and the other students have experienced. Hey, you actually need to do the yoga to get the benefit of the yoga. So it sounds obvious when you're watching a video, but it might sound a little bit more difficult at 5 a.m. when your alarm goes off. Hey, that's part of self-betterment. That's why we do the practice. Okay, so there are other famous yoga texts, and there's one more I'll refer to, and I've brought it here. It's a little Bhagavad Gita. I had this one for a while. It's chapter 6, verse 36. Vasyatmana tu yatatta sakyo vaptum upayataha. And the translation here, this is the Hare Krishna version, says, for those who have their minds under control, it is possible to attain if they strive with the proper means. That's a bit vague, but I have a slightly better translation here. It's actually from an old Sanskrit book of mine. And it said, yoga can be gained through proper means by one of endeavor who is disciplined. And that's exactly what it is. A disciplined practice over an extended period of time, which is exactly what the Yoga Sutras were saying as well. A little note here on discipline, while it came up. I heard a really good quote from a friend of mine. She once said to me, Sadhana said to me, I never want to be motivated because then I won't have to rely on my discipline and I might lose it. And that's a really interesting perspective because a lot of people before they start yoga or in the first few weeks of yoga might saying, I struggle with motivation to get up in the morning. And the thing is, motivation isn't going to help you. If you have to watch a motivational video or, I don't know, look at an Instagram post on a sunset, all we're doing is crowding our mind with other people's thoughts. You cannot build up motivation over an extended period of time. There will be days when you wake up and that motivation is gone. And then it can't help you. Whereas discipline is much slower to build up. You can't do it in 10 seconds like you can by watching a motivational video or picture or something like that. It takes a little bit longer, but it stays for so much longer. Discipline, in one sense, lasts forever. And even though someone, and we may know people or we may have had periods where after a highly disciplined period, finishing, I don't know, some education course or a difficult work or some sporting event, we kind of go lazy for a while. Well, we know deep inside that we've done that. It's a notch on our belt. It's a feather in our cap. We know that we could do it again. And you don't have to dig very deep mentally to come into that discipline. And that's a very useful self-knowledge to have. All right, off the discipline. So how do we master the art of turning up? And not quite related to discipline, but more of a technique, the way we master the art of turning up is to set up systems. Now, one of the best way to look at this is often when I teach philosophy, actually, I'll teach people who are coming into yoga from a sporting background. They may have been professional athletes. And I always ask the professional athletes or the ex-professional athletes the same thing. How did you do it when you were in the middle of a training block and just getting out of bed was almost impossible? When you woke up and everything hurt. Everything was painful. Your head was dizzy. The room was spinning. How did you swing your legs over the side of the bed, creep to the shower to warm up your muscles, creep to the coffee machine or the kettle to get your caffeine fix? How did you do it? And they almost all say the same thing. They say systems. You have to make it work for you. And another way of putting it, a good way of putting it is you never let it get above here. Okay? Any pain in your body never gets to the head. That which reaches the body does not reach the mind. And so as long as you can rely on your systems, and for an athlete, say waking up in the morning and doing their warm-up just by, I don't know, going for a run around the block or starting mobility work, whatever it is, they will have their shoes there, their clothes there, everything will be lined up, all the distractions will be away. I know one thing I used to do when I was doing hard training is I used to hide my alarm clock in my shoes. So I would have to go to my shoes and get my alarm clock out in order to stop the chirping. And then I was out of bed anyway because I was over at my shoes. So I put my shoes on and went for a run. So yeah, there are different techniques, but really it's systems. Getting those systems to work and never letting it above your neck. So how do we do that? Well, we don't entertain our thoughts. Yogis, once you've been practicing for a while, you realize you are not the architect of your thoughts, okay? In the moment, they just come floating by. And you just don't entertain them. You don't listen to them. You just do what you decided to do before. Okay, so how do we do that in practice? Well, if an excuse comes, that excuse doesn't get a say. If you had bad sleep, that bad sleep doesn't get a say. If it's bad weather outside, that bad weather doesn't get a say. So a nice way of looking at this is to reframe it, to flip it. Could you imagine yourself as a person when the weather always got to decide what you were going to do? Whether you were going to go to yoga, whether you were going to get out of bed. What sort of person would you end up as? Would you like to be that person? I know I wouldn't. I don't want the weather to decide what I'm going to do. I don't want excuses to decide what I'm going to do. I don't want however I happen to sleep to decide what I'm going to do. So I just don't let it. And it sounds obvious when we're here in front of a video, but it's a little bit more tricky in the morning, and that's why we like to rely on our systems. So if you have to get a Post-it note, and I've got a Post-it note, we'll get to that stuff later. I've got a Post-it note with me today. If you have to get a Post-it note and stick it up somewhere so you can look at exactly what you have to do step by step, not one foot in front of the other, but put coffee in coffee maker, put water in coffee maker, close the top, press the button, whatever it is, down to the smallest steps, then do that. All right. And slowly you'll be building that habit, just like the professional athlete does. Okay. And then over time, that will become easy. Certainly for me, I don't even think about it in the mornings. Well, that's the whole point, really. But it doesn't occur to me that I would do anything other than what I'd planned to do. Of course, if you're really sick, if you're in a fever dream, with influenza or something, well, then you're not getting out of bed anyway. If I were to black out maybe more than twice on the way to the shower, then I'd probably rethink, the next step. But even then, have your shower, have your coffee, sit down, then make a decision if you're really that sick. If you're too sick to leave the house, well, that's something. Maybe you can meditate instead. But there's no reason to let anything else influence your decision. Okay, so what are some tips and tricks to getting it done? Well, I would say a little bit of a cheat code for beginners is to use the identity trick. Now in yoga, this is more towards the tantra side of things, okay? So it is not an Ashtanga Yoga, a typical Chitta Vritti Nirodha type practice. So we don't want to let this take over our life. But it's a useful tool to build the physical habit, okay? Especially for beginners. And the identity trick I'm talking about is creating a persona and then being that persona. If you think about in the 90s when a lot of Christians were walking around with the wristbands, WWJD, meaning what would Jesus do, as a question, okay, in this situation, what would me as a good Christian do as a behavior? Okay, so I'm not a Christian, but there were a few of those guys at school. And I got to thinking, well, what if we could take that into a yoga context? So what would yogi do? So in the morning you wake up, you could identify, or I can identify, two different personas. I can be Yogi Nico and I can be Lazy Nico. Well, Lazy Nico, there's no point focusing on what Lazy Nico is going to do because that's not going to get me anywhere. But I can ask myself, okay, what would Yogi Nico do now? And okay, so I'm a long way into many decades into my yoga journey. So Yogi Nico does what Nico does because Nico's already there. The habit's already built. But if the habit's not built, you can ask yourself, okay, what would the yogi do now? Here's another one. It's 9 p.m. Okay? You get to the end of your TV show. Do you watch the next one? Decision. What would yogi do? No, it's sleep time. Close the laptop or switch off the projector, whatever it is, and brush your teeth, go to bed. Done. Easy. You'll wake up in a better position in the morning. Okay, so it's a little trick. What would yogi do? But pretty soon, and there's, a lot of different research about how long habits take to cement. Some people it's a long time, it's a month, but other people it's much quicker than that as long as they're consistent. So maybe after a week or two, you're already finding it really easy to wake up in the morning, and it becomes the best part of your day. Certainly, when you don't entertain those thoughts, when you don't let them, anything in your body, you don't let it come above your neck, or anything that's floating by, you don't entertain that thought, well, that gives you some silence in the morning. And the yogis really, really appreciate this silence. In the ancient scriptures, it's called either Brahma Muhurta or Brahma Muhurti, depending on the scripture and the conjugation. So this time, Brahma Muhurta, refers to the time in the morning, the early morning, when the mind is quiet. And it's referred to as the best time to do yogic practices, of course. That's why we practice Ashtanga in the mornings. So another couple more tips. The next one will be, if you're starting yoga, start when you're busy. I have a lot of people contact me that say, I want to sign up to yoga with you. And I say, okay, you can't come until the start of the month, so start next month. And then a couple of days before, they'll contact me and say, this month is really busy. Can I start in summer? And my answer to them is, well, that's not going to work for you, because summer's only 2-3 months long. And what's going to happen when you start back at school, when you start back at work? You're going to be busy again. In those circumstances, you're just going to drop your yoga. So the best time to start yoga is when you're busy, when you've got a lot on at school, when you're training for a sporting event, when you've got a lot on at work, all these sorts of things. Because if you can do it then you can also do it when you're not busy. And in those moments when you're not so busy, when you have less time at work, it's school holidays, or when you haven't got so much on, when you've got free time, you should use that free time for having fun. Yeah, enjoy the world. The yogis say, only Prakriti can liberate Purusha. So you have to enjoy the world. That is what the householder does. Yeah, okay. So, next tip, start when you're busy. Okay, what's the next thing? Put the yoga in your diary, or put it in your calendar. If you have an important meeting, you're going to put it in your calendar. If there's an important birthday, you're going to put it in your calendar. A social event, you're going to put it in your calendar. If you ascribe the same importance to your yoga practice, you'll put it in your calendar. And my tip is, if you have some travel time as well, put the travel time in your calendar. Just set up a repeating event, and the travel to yoga, then the yoga practice, and the travel from yoga to wherever you're going next, to work or whatever it is. That way, whenever you refer to your diary and you look at, maybe get an opportunity to do something the night before or have an early meeting that morning, you will make arrangements to either say, no, I can't do it then, let's do it the next day or at a different time, or you will reschedule that yoga practice for a different time or for a different day. And thus you'll keep doing your practice. Now, the amount that you practice, how often you practice, is individual. In our shala, we have a lot of people practicing 2 times a week, 3 times a week, all the way up to 5 times a week. Me, I'm a little bit more than that, probably more like 5.5, even 6 times a week, something like that. Okay, and that's individual. Obviously, I'm a yoga teacher. That's what I do, so I practice a bit more than the average person. And like I said, I've got it posted here, so I've written on it how often yoga was practiced in the history of Ashtanga as we know it in Mysore. And I'll start with the early days when Krishnamacharya was teaching. And I've only spoken to one person who practiced with Krishnamacharya, is a really old guy. And he related to me that they would only have the moon days off. But when they had the moon days off, most people would take 2 days off. So classes would close on the moon day, but they would practice in the morning their yoga, and then on the day before the moon day, and then in that afternoon they would travel back to village, or their village, their town, wherever they were from. And so then they would spend that night at their village. Now the travel back to the village was either on the train or walking, quite long distances actually, quite often. They would stay that first night and have the moon day at home with their family, their extended family. And often they would also spend the next night as well back at their village. And the following day, in the morning, travel back in time for class, but they wouldn't be back in time for yoga class. So they'd travel back and they'd be in time for the other Gurukula style studies that they were doing at the Mysore college. So at the Sanskrit college, sorry. So that would mean that first morning of the moon day and the morning after they were off. And if we're doing examples here as I go through the list, we have, we're just going to take this year as an example. This year is a leap year, so it's 366 days. I'm saying this because I've done the maths approximately. Okay, 366 days, and there are 25 moon days being either new moons or full moons, which are the traditional days off in Ashtanga Yoga. And of those moon days, there's one of them on a Saturday, and there are 5, or quite a lot, on Sundays. Okay, so these are our examples. If we had 2 days off of every moon day, that's 50 days off, 366, but becomes 316 practice days a year. And according to my maths, that is 6 days practice per week. So back in the early days at the Mysore Palace, at the Mysore University, the Sanskrit college, they were practicing 6 days a week. Okay, we're going to move forward through time to the early Pattabhi Jois period. And I'm going to hop over what I think is an anomaly here, and that is that there were some Westerners that came to Mysore and who would practice twice a day. I think this was more of a yoga holiday type thing, where they would do nothing but practice asana, eat coconuts and bananas and sleep. So that's not sustainable for a householder, which an Ashtangi is. An Ashtanga Yoga is a chaturashrama. It's a householder form of yoga. It's not a sannyasin's yoga. It's not the monk's yoga. Okay, that's more sitting still for 6 hours and meditating. That's a different thing. The yogi has a family, a job in Ashtanga Yoga. Yeah. Okay, so moving on, this early Pattabhi Jois period, the practice was also moon days off, but it was only 1 day off in the moon day, the traditional moon day. So if we take our 366 days in the year, then that's 25 days off, and I've done the maths, 341, so 6.5 days per week. Okay, 6.5 days a week, a little bit more. Okay, 1 day off every couple of weeks. Okay, moving on, we have the late Pattabhi Jois period, and in the early 70s, his wife, Amaji, told him, I need 1 day off where you help with the kids. And so he would take Saturdays off. And so there was no practice on Saturdays. Okay, doing the maths, moon days off and Saturdays off. That makes... one thing I haven't commented here is that, it's on my post-it note, is on that Saturday you had a Saturday practice. The Saturday practice was an oil bath practice. Now, I'm not going to go into that now, but this is the practice that existed when I first started Ashtanga, where people would practice 6 days a week, Sunday to Friday, and then on Saturday you would do an oil bath. It's basically covering your body in castor oil or different oil depending on Ayurvedic things. And then you would spend half a day in bed, basically, reading and relaxing and sleeping. That seems to have gone out of fashion lately, but if you don't include this Saturday practice, this oil bath practice, then the amount of practice we're doing, the number of days practicing, is down to 5.5 days a week. If you include this Saturday practice, then that's obviously back up again. But the asana practice being 5.5 days a week. Okay. We can call that the late Patabi Joyce period, and we can also call it the early Sharat period, the early My Guru Sharat Joyce, the early Sharat period. Okay. This changed very slightly when Sharat started taking Sundays off instead of Saturdays, and that was because of carpooling for his kid, getting his kid to classes. So not important why, but it changed our calculation a little bit also because less and less or fewer and fewer people are doing that Saturday practice of the oil bath now on Sunday. Okay, so if we take off moon days and Sundays, then according to my post-it note, that's 294 days, which becomes 5.6, or again, 5.5 days per week of practice, of asana practice. Now, as an aside here, many women would also take a ladies' holiday. Now, this is a much more complicated issue. It's I won't go into it now because it deserves a video of its own, but for a bunch of different reasons, certain people would take 3 days off during their menses, the first 3 days of their menses off, and that would be, I've done the maths again, assuming a 28-day cycle, that is 13 times a year, 13 times 3, 39 days. Some of them fall on already rest days, so that makes 31 days or 30 days a year. And we get back to, we get all the way down to a 5-day a week, 5.0, 5-day a week practice. And this is interesting because we also have what I call a Western practice. And this is a practice that has become more and more common, especially during what I'll call the second Ashtanga boom in the late 90s, when Ashtanga became much more common for everyday working folk. So people who work a Monday to Friday job would do their Ashtanga in the mornings on the Monday to Friday, and then weekends were for family and friends and so on. And occasional weekend practices, such as lead classes once a month or whatever it might be, but the majority of people would start to practice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then have 2 days off as a rest period. So this is sort of, not everyone's doing this. A lot of people are doing much more traditional practices as they were practicing over the last century, but many people now have this Monday to Friday practice, and this is where a lot of my students end up practicing, because especially here in Sweden, the weekend is a time for going out and having fun. Yeah, going to the forest or whatever it is. So that sort of practice is a 5-day a week period of practice, but it doesn't mean that your practice should specifically be 5 days a week. A lot of people, especially in the first few years of an Ashtanga practice, will start with 2 days a week of practice or 3 days a week of practice. And it's quite important that you spend the time to figure out what works for your body or what works for your schedule, because this is yoga we're talking about, and yoga is there to support life. Your life is not there to support your yoga practice. It's the other way around. Sure, in Chaturashrama, the stages of a yogi's life, towards the end of your life, yes, you may change your priorities, and it is all about your yoga practice towards the end. But not when you're a householder, not when you're a student, not when you have a job, not when you have kids. So for those people, you need to find out what fits in with your life. Now, in terms of the length of practice and the amount of physical effort, mental effort you put in a practice, that is something for you to figure out with your teacher. That's why parampara, the guru-shishya relationship, or the teacher-student relationship exists, and it needs to be a dialogue where you say, for example, if you were doing a huge amount of dharana work, concentration practices, maybe that would make you a bit too mentally exhausted for difficult morning meetings, as an example. Then you would tone that down. If you were doing too much physical work and you were too tired during the day, it was wearing you out, you would tone that down. If you were finding that you weren't doing enough physical work, you weren't getting stronger, you weren't getting fitter, then you would crank it up a notch. So that is really something that needs to be a dialogue between you and your teacher. And of course, that's what teachers know. That's over time, the experience and testing with different students, what works, what doesn't work. That's where the teacher gets their experience. That's what the teacher's job is. Okay. One more thing I'll point out there is that when you are figuring out a yoga practice, if you figure out what's right for you now, it doesn't mean it's exactly what's right for you next year or the year after or the year after. An Ashtanga practice is a lifelong practice, and we get much more efficient with time. Our bodies get used to the practice, and so we're able to do more and more difficult asanas with less effort. So taking me as an example, if I look at the amount of effort I was putting into an Ashtanga practice before I had kids, it was a lot more effort than I put in now, because obviously, I've got 3 small kids. It's tiring, right? So I can't put in all that physical effort into an Ashtanga practice, but at the same time, I'm probably doing as many or maybe even more asanas than I was doing a few years before I had kids, because I'm much more efficient as a practitioner. Now, that's just me as an example, but over time, your mind will change, your body will change, you will become stronger, more flexible, fitter. You will find concentration practices you will find holding concentration, the ekagra mind, much easier, so it takes less effort. You will find that disturbances to consciousness will be much less troubling, so you sit in equanimity much better. And then later on with samprajñata samadhi states, and eventually resting in Advaita, in non-dualism, the practice itself is a reward. You almost don't notice the difficulty for most of the practice. And so you will get there, and over time that means you can practice more without it having, without needing the same amount of effort. So that's an interesting thing. Okay, so we've spoken about the amount to practice, so I think that's about it. I'll do a little bit of a summary now. The most important thing in Ashtanga Yoga is mastering the art of showing up, literally showing up to class. We spoke about why you show up, why mastering the art of showing up is the most important thing, and that's obviously related to the benefits that you want from Ashtanga Yoga. So why are you practicing your yoga? We spoke about how you master the art of showing up, and then we showed some tips and tricks to get that started and to make sure that you can maintain it. And then lastly, we spoke about how often people practice Ashtanga Yoga, so how often people need to show up. And that's it. Happy practicing. Bye.